It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman. Training camp week 2. We are off and running, Logan. And you, sir, have been diving into the tape. You have been charting things. Specifically, passes, which is good because if you were charting runs, this would not be a very long episode. They have started to work a little bit of the run game in. Of course, the pads come on. We're recording this on Monday. Tuesday, the pads go on. So we will have a really fun episode later this week, kind of taking a look at the first padded practices with offensive line, defensive line being on much more even playing field, how everything else gets affected. But, Logan, what we can do today is take a look at how the quarterbacks have performed so far, how the O-line has held up given the circumstances, and then the ongoing battle, probably the most fun battles going on right now in camp, DBs versus wide receivers, so much talent on both sides of the ball. But when you started looking at specifically Sam Howell, we'll get to Brissett in a second, but when you start looking at Sam Howell, any pattern starting to emerge of things he's doing well, areas of concern, et cetera, through the first couple of days of camp?
Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to kind of talk about, Sam Howell and the O-line kind of back-to-back here in these segments. But, one of the things that sticks out to me is just there seems to be, like when you just watch it, when you're just watching practice, you're like, oh, that ball is completed. Oh, that was on time. Oh, this looks good in 7-on-7. Like I went back and charted team blitz and most of the team pass, like just team, they call it team period. So run and passes, kind of like a pseudo scrimmage, but it's scripted for the last 3 days. And one of the things that stood out to me is this, like, there seems to be like a lack of just like, I don't want to say lack, but like not a super detailed kind of understanding of the offense. And what I mean by that, there was a play where, they've got a 5-man protection. Defense is obviously rushing 6. The ball needs to get out to the back. He's late to the back and the ball's tipped and it's batted down. So it's kind of like, to me, it's like if he's on his stuff, if he's like super dialed in, that ball is out right now. Like, because Jacoby Brissett had basically the same, not the same play, but a very similar play, 5-man protection, 6-man rush. He sees it right away. There's no hesitation right when the ball's in his hand. He flicks the ball to the back, and it's probably a 5-yard gain. And like when I was watching Kansas City film, that was something that I thought they did a really good job of as a coaching staff. Andy Reid, the whole staff, kind of basically saying like, hey, when like getting the ball out of the quarterback's hand is more than just having a concept that gets the ball out of the quarterback's hand. It's like also how do I teach the quarterback when he needs to get the ball out of his hand and when the protection is going to be deficient. So to me, that was one of the things that stuck out to me. I just was like, there's some little stuff like that, like little details that, maybe could be a little bit better. And I think the other thing that's important to kind of note is like, his offensive line is kind of going through it a little bit right now. And we'll talk about that more with the offensive line, but just not as crisp, not as sharp like Jacoby on Saturday was really, really dialed in, right? They got a pressure. He's hot. Balls to Jahan, or not Jahan, number 83. I don't know his name, but ends up being I think it's
Kyrick McGowan.
Yeah, McGowan. It ends up being a big play, right? And it's off of a nothing. It's just like catch. I know I'm hot, balls out. Great job, right? Or anticipating a throw, right? Or anticipating the leverage on a choice. And it just seemed a little bit like there's a guy in Jacoby Brissett who has played a lot of football, is playing with, I would say, a better offensive line to defensive line ratio. And we can talk about that more in a minute. Right. And obviously not playing against like the best coverage group, and it's like he just looks like he got really comfortable. He did have a really bad interception on Friday where they kind of are running all verticals from like a split back field, and the back's kind of trying to hit the seam and he throws a pick versus Tampa 2. So it's not like he's been perfect, but I just say there's like that, it's something that we talked about, like that professionalism that, he's been in the league for 7 years, like that he just gets some of that stuff. And I do think that the second offense is a little bit better than the second defense right now, partially because he's helming it.
Right. And, this is the kinds of things, we've talked about this, a couple of things that you've touched on a million times before, right? When Logan Paulsen got to play in the 4th preseason game back in the day, just killed it because
murder fest.
You were better than everybody else on the field. You're out there with all the first teamers, and you're like, okay, maybe I'm not a starter at this point in my career, whatever. And you're out there, yeah. Okay, I see why Jordan Reed excels, and maybe I'm blocking my face off. But you get out there against the fourth stringers that aren't going to be on a roster in a week when you were definitively a roster NFL player. Same thing. Jacoby Brissett is a starting caliber player with a ton of experience, going against backups who are not having a ton of experience. And that is going to matter in these settings. So that's thing one. Thing two is it is important to understand the context of training camp in general. And Ron, I thought, put this really, really well. I think it was on Thursday last week, where he just flat out said, like, there are throws Jacoby made as a veteran, and it turns out Sam was actually doing some of the same stuff, and he would come to us after, and you're like, hey, man, why did you do that? And he's like, well, I knew I had the first read. I wanted to see if I could get to the second. And maybe that wasn't like first or second read in terms of progression, but like I knew I had the safe thing. I wanted to see if I could do the dangerous thing. And turns out I can't, but I knew what I was doing. Right. And so there are elements of that could be happening as well. Sure. And you might be able to see that on tape of like, you watch the helmet stripe and it's like, oh yeah, he saw it. Then why did he turn it down? Well, it's because he wanted to see if he could get the bigger play. But he knows at least that he can't do that. Now he's got to make that change, and we got to see it the next rep, the next time they run that play. As camp goes on, like you got to start practicing doing the right thing and stop experimenting. But those are some of the context of training camp that happens here. And I think a lot of that is going to lead to, like, if Jacoby already knows some of those answers, he's going to look better right now. But the last thing I'll say is this, is when you look at the physical skills of Sam Howell, that's not going to be the reason why he fails. Like, he's got a great arm. He's super mobile. Like, there's so many good things. The thing that we just don't know, and we won't know until the regular season for real, but we're not going to even have a moderately decent idea of until the Baltimore practices, is how quickly he can process it. And that would be my question for you, is like, how much of that are you able to see right now where this is clearly a guy that's not up to speed? Hopefully it's just not up to speed yet, but is not up to speed of what it takes to play quarterback at the NFL level.
Yeah, and I will say there is a distinct difference between that first defense and that second defense. So, and they the old adage with defense is pressure burst pipes, and you see that, right? You get guys who, it's not necessarily the starting four defensive linemen were having a tremendous camp, so they're doing a great job, and that's something we're going to talk about in a minute. But it's also, hey, like the safeties hold the rotation a little bit more. The blitzers are a little bit faster. They know how to fit the blitz. They know how it works off the rush. And so they had an interesting rush the other day where I don't remember the exact pattern, but basically the back, who was Gibson, looked to the right because there was someone in the A gap, and that person was tearing out of there to go kind of get into I think it was like a Tampa 2 look. So he's the Tampa 2 player from the line of scrimmage, which is like high-level varsity stuff, right? Yeah. And so instead of immediately snapping to his next protection responsibility, he kind of lingers there because he's kind of diagnosing. And then all of a sudden he gets the protection late. Sam's kind of got this person in his lap. It's probably a sack. The ball's out later than he wants to because he's kind of navigating this off his back foot. And it's an interception by Emmanuel Forbes that everyone was talking about on Saturday, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, is that his fault? Kind of, like, don't throw that ball. But also, like, there was a comedy, or not a comedy, but a kind of a sequence of things that happened that I guess I would say Jacoby doesn't have to negotiate, right? Because you're not going to get this really well-disguised look where the back kind of misdirects his vision and then gets back to his actual responsibility late. You're not getting that same type of pressure from the defense. So I think from an operational standpoint, you feel pretty good about where he's at, but there are some things to his game. There are some things for the offense that you're like, man, that's something that has to be kind of remedied and cleaned up. And I know for a fact Eric Bieniemy is going to try and clean that up. I know for a fact Sam Howell is going to try and clean it up, but I think with a younger player, it's always something that you're like, when is it going to happen? When's it going to click for him? And I haven't watched practice today yet. We're recording this on Monday, so I haven't watched Monday's practice yet. We're going to review that in Wednesday's pod. But that's always something I'm watching, especially in team blitz, because that's like where you're getting high level understanding of what's going on. And I will say, and I can't get too schematically detailed here because of like the rules of working for the team.
Just so people understand, like we can talk about a lot of stuff, but part of the reason that we're allowed to, as media, cover practice is there's a written understanding. This is not an unwritten rule, a written understanding that we will not give away a competitive advantage to other teams. So we'll be as detailed as we can without doing that.
Right. And so, like, the defense is installing Cinco, and they just did some really cool, creative stuff off that Cinco package that I haven't seen them do. And, they're working through some stuff too. They're trying stuff out. They're trying different looks. And you can tell there were times where it was like, man, I didn't think that guy was going to be here. I didn't think this drop was going to be there for Sam. And Jacoby has played enough football versus different defensive structures where it's not like this shocking thing. And also it's like the low def version of the defense. Like when you watch the ones go, you're like, whoa, like that disguise is sick. They get there really fast. You get guys like Cam Curl holding stuff way longer than I would feel comfortable holding it. And then they're there when the ball's there, right? Or they're there to break the pass up or whatever it is. With the young guys, it's like, man, I got to be in this cover 2 shell. I'm going to be in cover 2. And so Jacoby, I think, has an ability to kind of diagnose that a little bit easier because the opponent isn't as sharp. And that's not their fault. They're all new to the defense. Like one of the things we've talked about with the defense over the last couple of days is like they've been super, like this is the 3rd year of the scheme, right? They are kind of, remember we always talk about with the offense and Kyle Shanahan, like it takes 3 years to learn a scheme. Like they're in it and they're detailed and they've worked together. And like some of the stuff they're doing on the defensive line, like, oh my gosh, it's awesome. And so like this new offense is contending with this, a guy, it's like a veteran fighter, like it's just a different type of deal. They're battle hardened. They know what they're doing. And this group's still kind of learning how to walk a little bit. And I think you see some of that difficulty with Sam, because then you get to 7-on-7 and it cleans up a little bit, because there's no rush, like he can see it a little bit better. And so like, that's kind of where I'm at with Sam Howell and Jacoby.
What was the last day I was at practice? I think it was Thursday. Yeah, it was Thursday. And literally the first thing I wrote down, I just kind of watched 7-on-7. And maybe I wrote down like some of the defensive back rotations and stuff. But my first like major note was, whoa, big difference 7-on-7 to 11-on-11.
Yeah.
And it's like 4 first-rounders up front against an offensive line that doesn't have a lot of experience together and might not be good. We don't know yet. That's not me saying they're bad. We don't know yet. Makes a big freaking difference. Yeah. And I guess I was like, I caught flack from, the commenters, if you will, from whoever callers on the radio that it's like, oh, everyone says Sam's awesome except for you. Why are you like so down on Sam? And I was like, look, I don't exchange notes necessarily with some other folks.
Which is probably the right way to do it because it's your unadulterated opinion.
Occasionally we're talking on the sideline and, the conversations I had, I was surprised because we all saw that, right? Like we all saw that wasn't a particularly good period, right? Yeah. And it's okay. Like, again, it's context of saying like it's not a good period and it's not really that concerning yet because of all the reasons that we've laid out. But I was surprised at how high people were on Howell. And like his performance as if they were grading it out, in this vacuum of training camp. And it's like, yeah, he's good. I'm like, no, it's not concerning, but it's not like he's been killing it. And there's, I think, Logan, a lack of like crispness. There's this lack of like snappiness, lack of timing that when Brissett is out there, you definitely see a little bit more. You see it a lot more, or at least I did on Thursday. In 7-on-7. Like, I think their 7-on-7 period on Thursday was the best that I've seen. Again, I was only there for Wednesday, Thursday. They obviously practiced again Friday, and then Saturday. They had 10,000 fans there and the whole deal. They practiced again this morning, so I'm missing a couple practices in my checklist here. But that 7-on-7 period, you see it, and you're like, okay, he definitely knows the offense pretty well. Like, he definitely can read through it, but can he do it at the speed that's necessary when a Chase Young or a Montez Sweat is coming down your throat? That's TBD, and obviously the offensive line can play a big role in that. And I guess the thing I would ask you is, like, have you been on teams where specifically the defense is really amazing defense, and then you guys are thinking on the offensive side, like, we are in deep crap going into this season, and then all of a sudden you realize that it's because your defense was that good, and maybe it actually helps you because you're battle tested and you're used to playing at a speed that you don't even have to play at once you play a non-elite defense.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There was for sure a year that way. I can't
My guess
remember.
would be San Francisco or Atlanta.
San Francisco, Atlanta, I knew that, like, as I had been other places, I knew the defense wasn't that good. They were talking like the defense was really, really good, and I was
Yeah,
like,
I just knew
this.
that Dan was there, so I figured that might have been one of the options. I don't
So
remember what
the
year
defense
exactly that was.
schematically is good, but I remember, like,
Yeah.
there's like, this is like a little bit of a tangent, but like when you go to a new team and they've got like their guys, and this is one of the benefits of being in a place for 1 year, because you get to see like how teams talk about themselves each year. Like I went to Chicago after being here, and basically like, Fox got up there, the head coach, and was like, this is one of the best teams I've been a part of. Like we're ready. We're gonna like win the division. And I was like, no, we're not gonna do that. You know what I mean? Like you could just tell, like the roster, the coaching, it wasn't where it needed to be. But like you're so close to it as a coach, you can't step back and see it. And I had just been with, like that offensive line in 2016, which was like Trent, Morgan
Sheriff,
Moses,
yeah,
Sheriff, like all, and I was like,
yeah.
that is a group, and they were talking about their group in the same way. I'm like, they're not the same. They're talking about their defense, and so when you're like right up against something, it's hard to tell. But I'm trying to think. I think I want to say it was like 2011 or 13. Like we were getting maybe 12, might have been 12. We were getting our butts kicked in practice, like absolutely kicked. And then we kind of got to our first game. I forget, it was against New Orleans, and we were like,
yeah, 2012, it's New Orleans,
and I was like, oh God, like we're good. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? It was like one of those things where it's like, man, like we kind of suck. Like it's because the defense, they see the zone read, they have a plan for it, and it's just hard to do that stuff. They know you run outside zone, they know your play action stuff. And then we got that first game, and it was just like, whoa, like this is totally different than and it was like the game was easier than practice. And so I'm hoping, because like it forces you to get better. I'm hoping that this team is like that the defense is just, they're going to pick on the offense a little bit, and it's going to help them turn a corner into something that is better than what they are right now.
Yeah, this is where Ron has to be a head coach, and he's done this in the past. So this is not me like throwing shade at Ron. This is actually me knowing something that Ron's done, or at least having heard that he's done this before. And at some point, you tell the defense to back off a little bit, and like, hey, Chase, like you look great, man. I'm really proud of you. Montez, you guys are crushing it. Dial it back a little bit. We need to let our offense operate, and because you do need to get like. It gets to a point where, like, yes, you have to, practicing against the best is great. Iron sharpens iron. But if you're not quite iron yet, all you're doing is getting cut. Yeah. And so you have to actually be able to practice. And this is where, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not the first couple of days in pads, but eventually at some point, if the defense just keeps thrashing the offense every day, and it's not even like they're thrashing them right now, but if it's getting to a point where you're not getting the work in offensively that you need, you might tell that one defense to dial it back a little bit. You could also put the one offense against the two defense. Like there are things you can do as a head coach that don't even involve going to specific players and being like, hey, chill out a little bit, to organize some wins for your offense and allow them to get the work in that they need. Or the other way around, if your offense, if you're the Chiefs defense and Mahomes is just dicing you every day, like you might do the same thing in reverse if you're in Kansas City, for instance.
I was about to say, like you're already seeing a little bit of that, like the last 3 or 4 plays of Sam's run, like with the ones as the quarterback, it'll be, like Casey Toohill, James Smith-Williams, Ridgeway, Big Phil in there, F.A. Obata. And so it allows them a little bit more efficiency offensively, to your point. And I don't know if that's planned. They might have been doing that since the beginning, but it felt like on Saturday they started kind of incorporating some of that. And I guess we can talk about the defensive line now. Is that cool, or do you want to?
Yeah, no, by all means.
Yeah. So basically, like they put in their Cinco front on Friday, and it was just like, that's their five defensive line front. Yep. So it's like,
so it was the like four first rounders, and Big Phil is like the number one version of that, right?
Yeah. And it was crazy. So like, basically it's let me think if I can remember who it was. It was Sweat, Payne, Big Phil, John Allen, and then Chase Young, left to right. And it was just like the offense, and they were bringing pressures and doing exotic stuff. And the offensive line, basically, like every play of that series, like I'm probably being a little hyperbolic, someone lost a one-on-one, someone lost a one-on-one.
Which, as a reminder, is why you do that, right? Yeah. Like if you have 5 down linemen, then your protection call is pretty easy. Each of your 5 offensive linemen gets one of those D linemen, and you can't double team anywhere unless you want to keep a tight end or a back end.
Yeah, and you can work slides, and there's ways around it, but it's tough. It gets you out of what you want to be doing in terms of getting eligibles out, like we've talked about before. And it was just crazy, and it wasn't just like straight rushes. It was like they were running ETs, like where the end is picking for the tackle, and then TEs where the tackle's picking for the end, and they were running like natural stunts where the three technique gets high and the end comes underneath, and it was just like tough, man. Because I actually think like Charles Leno has done a really, really nice job on Chase this camp of like, it's probably like 50-50 or 60-40 in favor of Leno, but it's like every day Leno's pulling something out of his bag. It's like, hey, I got Chase, I got a jump set this, I got a B set, I got a vertical to a jump. And it's just like you can see a veteran football player cultivating a plan for a young rusher. And Chase has done a good job of kind of meeting him and forcing him to do that stuff, which is great. But on this Cinco day, they just basically ran so many TEs, and Sadiq Charles had such a hard time like kind of passing that, because like on a stunt, right, the guard needs to be super aggressive, kind of punch the stunt flat so the tackle can overtake it, and then the guard can pass off to the defensive end who's coming around the other way, right? And they couldn't get it blocked, and it was tough. It's tough sledding because you got a really experienced guy in Leno who I think is again, I think he's had a really good camp, and I think Sadiq, to his credit, had a rough probably first 2 days, and then I thought you saw something kind of spark in him, right? You saw him kind of develop a plan. So both those guys, I think, over the last 2 days have definitely improved, and I think Leno's had a solid 4 days. But it's just that group is so good on the other side that it's really challenging. Same thing with Wiley, right? Wiley and Montez, like they're going to blows, and you can tell Montez has come out with some different pass rush stuff, and Wiley, they don't have pads on, obviously, so it's tough, but it's like, that's a tough matchup. And Wiley's had to jump and do some different stuff, and Montez has met that and done a good job. And then Big Phil, I had a nice rush. I think that's the thing I forget about Big Phil, is that like he is a big man, obviously. You don't get a nickname like Big Phil not being a big dude. But he has a little bit of pass rush juice to him. So he hits Nick Gates with like a stutter, like wiper basically, and ends up getting the pressure. And I was like, as much as I love Ridgeway, and Ridgeway's elite at stopping the run, you don't get that same pass rush juice, And so then you get F.A. Obata, who's been rushing from the 3 technique, and that group's just awesome. So really outstanding job in those passing, the team pass, team blitz situations. I will say the offense had a team run period the other day and absolutely gutted that defense. So like, obviously, like there's a little bit of, like nobody's perfect, right? Mm-hmm. And I think for
which
how
is kind of what you want.
Yeah. But they ran some kind of pin pull stuff, and you could tell that the defense hadn't been working fits too much. There were some open gaps, led to big plays, and I'd say they probably had 3 or 4 what I would characterize as explosive runs. And it's hard to tell in practice because you don't know if that arm tackle pulls the back down or whatever. But it was a pretty impressive day from a run standpoint. But the pass stuff, and again, I think that speaks to some of the issues that Sam. Again, I think Sam has been pretty sharp, like some of the issues we talked about, right? But I think overall, that's a tough group to work against because there's a lot of stuff in your face, there's a lot of color, and it just makes it really challenging. So
for sure, it's funny you say the arm tackle thing, and I just have all these visions of Duran and John making arm tackles last year, where like you have a 230-pound back who hits the hole, and John just like does a bicep curl in his face, and it's just like the guy's dead. Like how did you do that, John Allen? And by the way, you just mentioned so many guys who were playing so well. You didn't even mention John Allen, which is like that shows you the depth. Who's I'm sure having a great camp because he's John Allen.
And he's probably been, I don't know, like the most consistent in terms of wins,
Sure.
Like he's awesome.
He's John Allen.
He's John Allen, and I think he's got some new stuff in the bag that looks really cool for him. And again, poor Sadiq, man, like that's a tough day at the office. And Chris Paul's been getting some rotation in there as kind of that Cosme and for Sadiq. So it's not just like Sadiq, and he's done a nice job too. So
yeah, I want to go through the O-line in a second.
But
let me ask you this first real quick before we get into like the individuals of the O-line.
Yeah.
A lot of our confidence that this offense is going to be all right is on Bieniemy as a play caller and his ability to insulate Sam and the O-line. So how much of that is actually even at play at this point in camp? Because they have run, some of this is like the jet sweeps and things like that, the motions to keep teams off balance. I don't feel like they've used as much of that. It's in the offense. They've used it some, and just, again, we have to be a little bit general here. But how much of this is the fact that you're dealing with kind of still a scaled down version of the playbook versus and like scaled down periods that you're not setting up plays in the first quarter that you're going to, hit in the third kind of thing. Like how much is play calling even a factor at this point in training camp?
Oh, it's basically like none. It's not. There's no game plan. Like it's just
Right.
like, and that's part of the thing that's tough about it. It's like
you run a play, then you run another one, and they're not connected other than just like it's the next play on the list to run.
And you probably coach the concept versus the defense you're expecting to a certain extent, but it's like versus our team. Like if I was game planning for them, like based on what San Francisco did last year, like I'd get into some heavier personnel groups to throw the football because you're going to get Cinco as the response to stop the run, which makes a lot of sense, right? You run a lot of play pass, you run a lot of max pro, you create a lot of space, you stress the linebackers out, and that's what Kansas City likes to do too, right? When they played Denver last year, they ran like a lot of heavier personnels, like multiple tight ends, fullbacks, because it elicited a specific response. And so there's none of that going on. There's no like chip help. There's no like anything. It's like, hey, it's day 2 install. We're running this. And I think we've talked about this before. Like sometimes you just get a bad install crossover. Like I think you want the coordinators to communicate so they're kind of ready. But sometimes like we got Cinco in and we're doing our 6-man pro and we're going to bring some like 6 and 7-man protect like blitzes and stuff. Like that's a bad day. You know what I mean? Because you just don't have the stuff. And the fact that you can't run the football, I think is also, you can run the football, but that's not a priority of the offense, in the same way that it's been in years past. And I think they will run the football. I think that's going to be something they do, but they just, in the way the practice is structured, and it makes sense. Like, why are we going to run the football and no pads?
Right.
Like it doesn't.
You can't practice the blocking the way it needs to be practiced.
Right. And so that makes sense. So like when all that stuff kind of gets folded back in, the keepers get a little bit better. There's more pull on some of the fakes because you can hand the ball off to those guys because they're handing the runs off. I think it just gets a lot better. You know what I mean? It's just going to get a lot better. So if you're asking me if I'm concerned, I know a lot of people have asked me, like, no, like I'm not really concerned yet. Like, I think, like I said, there's a lot of time. There's a lot of game planning still left to go. And I think that group's going to be elevated by that. So it's like Wiley's a pro. He'll figure it out, especially with EB kind of once EB's game planning, right? Leno, I think, will look good. Gates has looked good. Cosme has flashed some really, really nice stuff. But again, he's moved to a new position, so there's some lumps there. Sadiq's the guy that I think has had probably the toughest run of 4 days. But again, he goes against the best player in the defense every day. So it's like, that's tough. So I think ultimately, like as the game planning gets better, like I said, in the team run period, it was like this looked like the Hogs. Like that's it. Just it's kind of goes ebbs and flows. The defense isn't repped that a ton. I know the offense has been doing like offensive run walkthrough, so they were really ready to go for those looks, and they won the period, I would say. But and that's a good thing because when that all blends together, that means the offense is going to be a little bit more well-rounded. The defense can't tee off as much, all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah. So, all right, let's quickly run through the offensive line personnel and just how are we doing, any red flags. Because I was trying to think also to training camp last year, and like people were starting to wave the red flag a little bit on Carson, and it was like, hey, eventually this is going to get better, right? Turns out the answer was no. But I don't think that there's any red flags this time of year for anybody. Nevertheless, the quarterback or any of the guys we're about to talk about. But let's run through it. Leno, you think's had a good camp?
I think he's been good. That doesn't mean he wins every rep, but I think he's looked good. And I think Sadiq, again, I say the last day and a half has looked better. But
improvement is what you're looking for.
And he's a guy that, again, is one of those players that's a little up and down. Like some days he's really good. Some days he's not good. And that consistency kind of varies between reps. So, again, for a guy who is going into year 4, like I think it's a big year for him. I think he's physically capable of doing it. But it's like, how does he develop is the question. So,
yeah. What about Chris Paul?
I think Chris Paul's looked good. I think he's looked really good. He's looked like he's matured a little bit. He's more confident. He's running faster. Like last year, I felt like there was like a little bit of a hitch. And, when you talk to guys on the team and when you watch him play, he has extremely strong hands. So some of the stuff that John does to Sadiq, he cannot do to Chris because Chris is just throwing out these meat cleavers that just seem to kind of just be like magnets for human bodies. Like it's crazy how strong he is. So, obviously
Do you think he can push Sadiq for the starting job? Is that still on the table?
I do think that.
Okay.
I think that's the more I watch him, the more I think that's a real thing, because I think he's developed a lot. I think he's in better shape. Again, the strength, the confidence seems to be better. I think that's definitely something. And I think they're kind of even right now. At least in my mind, I think Sadiq probably gets the nod because he's got a little bit more experience. And I think he's a little bit better of an athlete. But I think that's something that by week 2 or 3 of training camp, if they're splitting reps, I wouldn't be like, oh my God, you know what I mean? So
yeah, that could be a Baltimore practice story for sure.
Sure.
The joint practice one.
Yeah.
All right, center Gates, how's he doing?
I think Gates has done a great job. I mean, there's a lot on his plate in terms of getting stuff called, protections and runs. I feel like he's done a good job. He's physical. I think he had a loss to Big Phil the other day. Like, that happens. It's pads, whatever, no pads on. But I think he looks settled in. Like I said, I think just kind of moving down the line. Cosme again, athletically, he flashes. Like I think he's learning the physicality of guard, which is another reason why you're always like, can a tackle move to guard? Because it's just a different physical beast.
Right, you're playing in a phone booth.
Yeah, and then I think Wiley, like in the team run period, both him and Wiley, Cosme and Wiley, like you see what makes them kind of special is that they can move their feet really well and they can get guys covered up. And I'd say they were one of the big reasons why the run period went so well, is because they can get guys covered up, they can move well, their double teams are violent and physical, they can get guys out of there. So obviously he's going against Montez, and I think Montez right now is the best edge pass rusher on the edge, and so that's a tough day every single day. And like I said, I think Montez has added some stuff to the bag. So again, that's something I'm watching, but I think he's a pro. I think EB knows how to use him. I think he's got some stuff to kind of help him mature as a pass protector. Is he going to be the best right tackle in football? No. But is he going to be fine? I think fine is what you're looking for on offensive line. So,
and then rookie check, Stromberg, Daniels.
Stromberg, I think, has looked pretty good. So I'll say this: the second offensive line, which is Cornelius, number 60, who's the XFL guy playing guard, Stromberg, and left guard is Chris Paul. Left tackle is Foster, I believe, number 73. That group has played well the last 2 days. They've done a really nice job. So, what is the guy's name? 60. He's actually been a pleasant surprise. He's a converted tackle playing guard. He's a big man, good and pro.
Which number you say is?
Number 60.
You got Jared Jones-Smith is wearing 60.
So he's actually I've been impressed with him. Like, he was a guy that I thought, no way he makes the team during rookie minicamp. And then now I'm like, maybe there's a good rotational guard piece there, or a practice squad guy, So that's someone to keep an eye on in terms of the last couple of days. Daniels is interesting because he's going against like the threes, and some of those technical deficiencies still show up. He's a very raw kind of developmental guy. He flashes occasionally, but I'd say most of his work is, he's got to work on some stuff, and we'll see how that goes over the next couple of weeks. Because that's what you see in training camp, right? You see some young guys step up and they improve a lot, and some guys just kind of stay the same and they're on practice squad. And I think that's kind of what you're looking at with him.
Yeah, he's going to be a borderline guy, and for a fourth rounder, you'd like to have a guy safely who's going to make the roster, but
sure,
we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. Don't forget, make sure you're subscribed to this podcast, because now we're coming into your feed more frequently. Bonus episodes on the quote-unquote off days. I guess they're not really off days if we're giving you an episode, but little quick 5-minute hits answering your questions, which you can leave not only on YouTube at 1067 The Fan or at Craig Hoffman, but you can leave his reviews. We're checking the reviews on Apple Podcasts as well. So basically, any way you can get in touch with us, you get us a question. We might answer it on a bonus episode that you get if you are subscribed to this podcast. All right, Logan, last but not least, talked a lot about what's going on inside. What's going on outside? We've seen Emmanuel Forbes have a pick six, because of course we have. We've seen Terry McLaurin burn Emmanuel Forbes, because of course we have. We've seen Dotson make some plays. We've seen Cam Curl. He had another pick today, actually on Dotson. So we've started to see these outside battles really heat up. It's really fun. There's so much talent, overarching themes, big takeaways, emerging patterns. What you got?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jahan looks like Jahan. He's like very, he's catching 3 or 4 balls of practice. He's catching a kind of a varied route tree. He's got that great route running savvy, which is awesome. Logan Thomas is the other guy that sticks out to me in that pass catching group. He just doing a great job, man. Like really understanding zones, making contested catches. A guy that like we've talked about him in OTA. He's kind of continued his OTA progression to now. And, I'm excited to see what he brings because he seems to have a really good, like, Kelsey-esque feel for the offense. Meaning, like, there's a level of flexibility that Kelsey has in the offense to kind of make the concept right. And not everybody can do that because they can't think of football in that way. And I think Logan Thomas has shown that ability. Curtis Samuel has only had like 1 big catch. I think it was on Friday. It was a nice route, kind of in an isolation situation. Good job. Cole Turner, I think, is a guy that's done a nice job and very consistent. And a guy that I think is moving way better, looks kind of like the most athletic kind of freak of the group is Curtis Hodges. Like he's doing some stuff from a route running standpoint that is very, very high level in terms of stems and releases. And the thing with him is he's not finishing plays the way he needs to finish plays. Like he's had some nice catches, but he's also had some drops. And I think if he wants to make that varsity and kind of be that mismatch weapon, like he's winning one-on-ones versus second string corners, and that's tough to do for tight ends. He's, no one can really match up with him, but he's got to finish the play. So that's the tight end room. Then I think receivers like Jahan has been like excellent. Terry's been a little quiet. Obviously, there was an explosive play a couple days ago. Bieniemy is a guy that
he's
has
had an awesome couple of
shown
days.
up. And I think one of the things about Bieniemy that always kind of bothered me is that he didn't finish plays. So like you run a nice route, you get some separation, you drop the ball. And he's had a couple that have been maybe out of bounds or whatever, but he's come down with the ball. And to me, that's showing progress and progression and improvement in a way that gets me excited for him as the 4th guy. Dax Mills has been absolutely crushing in like a very Dax Mills type of way, like this super savvy slot route runner who understands leverages and zones and can create space. He's been very impressive in terms of 3rd and 4th guys for a receiver battle. And then the backs, man, like your boy Brian Robinson has been absolutely balling, catching the football really well. Yeah. Running excellent routes.
I feel like that's in some ways the story of camp. Like there's a lot of stuff that's happening, and we're obviously getting to this 36 minutes, 37 minutes into the podcast, but like in many ways the story of camp is like, holy crap, Brian Robinson can do that.
Yeah.
And like he's running routes from everywhere. He look like there's been a couple of times where there's been explosive plays down the field, like pass plays down the field, and you're like, who was the receiver? That was Robinson.
Right, yeah.
Like he looks tall, he's lean, like, but he's still powerful. Like
yeah.
I did not know, and I don't know. Like you watched the college tape.
Yeah.
Like he didn't do this stuff at Alabama, as far as I know.
Well, the thing with him is like he could do it. Like when you watched him, like when you watched his pass cut up, it was like he catches. He doesn't like fight the ball. He doesn't drop a ton of balls.
Sure, but that's not running routes from the slot or outside or But just line him up at receiver.
I think there was like this perception of him that he couldn't do that stuff because he was big and because he just didn't do it in college. But like if a guy is as natural catcher as he was in college, you're always like, there's always a possibility. And right now, I quite frankly, I think he's running better routes and he's catching the football a little bit better than Antonio Gibson at the moment, which is kind of crazy to say. And I know Gibson's the explosive guy, but like B-Rob had a choice the other day, which is kind of that route that every offense in the NFL runs where it's like, I can go in, I can go out, I can kind of take a slant angle. And he diced up the linebacker. And I was like, I knew you could catch the football. I knew that. But that short area, suddenness, the feel for the route to set that up, that was pretty cool. And so if he keeps doing that, man, like he's going to get a lot of touches in the pass game, I think, because that's, again, a kind of a mismatch weapon if he's in the game. So I think I've been super impressed with him. I think we've kind of cut maybe young receivers. Casimir Allen is kind of getting some burn with that second group.
He's starting to flash a little bit.
Yeah, flash a little bit. And then number 18 from Minnesota State,
Jalen Sample.
Yeah, he's actually looked good. And as a guy that can kind of sneak around and maybe make the roster. And I like the other guys a lot, but they just haven't flashed the same way. They've got deficiencies in their game. So Bryson Tremaine is – go ahead.
I was going to say, there's a couple other receivers, though, specifically 2, that come with EB from Kansas City that I think are interesting. Marcus Kemp, we're 19 if you're going out to camp. Byron Pringle, we're 16 if you're out there watching. Pringle's made a couple of plays, had a couple of touchdowns. Kemp hasn't done as much, but he's known as like a special teams guy. When I did my roster projection, which, spoiler alert, our little bonus episode that I referenced earlier is going to be a very brief look at what the 53 could look like. When I did my roster projection, I actually put both those guys on because I think that the value of those positions is special teams. Like, if you're the fifth receiver with the top four ahead of you, like, you're not playing a ton of receiver. So I don't know what Jalen Sample is, for instance, as a special teams guy. But I know what Marcus Kemp is, and he's one of the better guys in the league, at least reputationally. Byron Pringle, same kind of thing, where like he's got some special teams value, and he obviously knows the offense. And if all of a sudden someone goes down and you need someone who knows the offense, do you trust the undrafted rookie with a little bit more upside, or do you trust the guy that's been with Eric Bieniemy for a couple years and is not going to screw up a route on a key down? And so I put those guys on, and I think Pringle specifically has made a couple of plays that tends to warrant it more. But the question becomes, like, how much do you value know-how? How much do you value teams versus the upside? And also you get into questions of, can I get that guy through to the practice squad? And for, guys that were undrafted free agents, you think that's probably not going to be a problem.
Right. And I think I'm glad you brought up Pringle because he's a guy that has definitely flashed. And I think if I had to say the best receivers from camp in terms of production, obviously Terry's going to make the team. Curtis is going to make the team. But Jahan's been very productive. Dax has been very productive. Bieniemy's been very productive. And then I think it's Pringle is the next guy, right? So, like, to me, if I was going to just offer receiver play, those are the guys that I'm selecting. And I think Kemp is probably outside looking in, at least as of right now, and things can change. And I also think partially because of how good the young tight ends have done, I think those guys are kind of essentially big wide receivers that kind of have a similar skill set to him. And so if you're trying to save a roster spot that gives you some flexibility in terms of manipulating defensive from a personnel standpoint, maybe. But, obviously, like I said, Curtis, for how good as he's looked in certain situations, hasn't been finishing the plays. And I will say Kemp, when he gets the ball thrown to him, he's got a little bit more I hate this expression, but a little more dog to him when the ball's in the air. Like, he's just a guy who's played NFL football, and he understands, like, there's an urgency when the ball's in the air to make that play. So I could see them going that way if they wanted to or if they had to. So, but right now the best six, in my opinion, are Pringle, Milne, Bieniemy, and then the top three, obviously. So, am I forgetting somebody?
No. Yeah. I mean, Tremaine's made plays. Sample's made plays. Like, there's been guys who've made plays that are farther down. It's just hard to justify that over guys who have NFL special teams experience. Like a guy like Milne who brings in that savvy and has made some catches, in big spots before. I don't know. Milne to me is
it's tough, but he's been so productive. Like, it's crazy.
He has, but like you remember, I don't even know if you were covering the team at the time. No, you weren't. You were still playing and you were elsewhere. Trey Quinn. Was a guy who was here. Like, he was awesome in camp because he had really precise route running ability and he's super smart, and Jay loved him. And then you get out there in games and it was just a little bit too fast. And I feel like Milne is that guy.
But I also feel like right now, at least what I've seen from him, he's taken he's matured a little bit as a route runner. Like, this offense fits him better than the last offense, which was like very vertically based. Yeah. Here, I feel like he can use some of his savvy, find the space. But I'm glad you mentioned Bryson Tremaine. Like, he played gunner in college, and I know if you show some stuff as a gunner, like that's a really good way.
And they need one because Cam Sims is gone.
And I think Sample will probably get an opportunity to play gunner. He's been a little bit more productive than Bryson Tremaine. Like, he's kind of playing with the twos a little bit more. But I do think that those guys, because of that gunner ability, maybe you sneak in as a seventh guy. It seems unlikely, but maybe, like just.
Well, it's also like we mentioned Casimir Allen. Like,
he's flashing a little bit too.
Yeah. Does Allen take Milne's spot because he's more explosive as a punt returner? Like, these are the things that we'll obviously be talking about as we go down. I want to circle back to Terry real quick.
Yeah.
A couple of us were joking on the sideline the other day at practice after Terry made the big play, and it's like, oh, there's Terry. Haven't really heard a lot from him, but of course, there he is. He just shows up, makes a big play. And last couple years, it's kind of like, the Commanders are down. And whoever it was said, like, announcer in the third quarter goes, the Commanders are down 17-0. They need a big play. Oh, there's McLaurin, his first catch of the day. And it's like, how many times have we heard that? And then you just go, why can't this guy get the ball more? And are you at all concerned that that is going to happen again, or is this just the nature of camp and, too early to even sniff around that being a thought?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've been kicking around a little bit. I think, Terry is a good football player. I'm not trying to besmirch Terry or anything like that, but I do think in terms of route running nuance, like this offense seems to favor guys who are very nuanced route runners. And what I mean by that is you're talking about guys who understand how to work stems, work different velocities of the route, work double sticks at the top. And I think Terry is a guy who runs every route very, very hard. And that's not always the best way to create separation and get open, especially in this offense. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for him with regards to like how he can mature in a different offense. And I think he's perfectly capable of doing that. But I think they're going to find ways to get him touches. I think he's got to challenge himself to get better, and I think he will. But sure. I think there's a reason why you see Jahan getting more targets, more effective targets in this offense as of right now, because he's a little bit more diverse in terms of his route tree and route running skill set. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
100%. And it's something where Terry's very open to being coached. He's talked about that with EB, and we saw it. The practice, we've referenced this on the pod. I referenced it on the radio show. There was a play where he actually made the catch on Forbes, but it was way harder than it needed to be because the route wasn't run super precisely. And EB called him over and was like, hey, man, this is how you make that better, how you make that easier. And if it's not a diving catch and you get to catch it standing up, maybe you get to run downfield and use your after the catch skills. We did see the one reverse to him already, which we know is going to be a part of this offense. And anyone who's watched Kansas City knows that they'll get the ball to anybody, anyway, anytime, as long as they're dangerous. So that's not exactly giving away a schematic advantage. At some point, they're going to get the ball to Terry as quickly as possible and try to run. How? Who knows? But we'll see. But I do think that's the kind of thing where that's the test for Terry this year is like, can you take that next step as a receiver, and have that nuanced ability, learn to slow it down so that you can speed it up, all the things that Jahan kind of has a natural ability to do. Yeah. Anything else on the DBs you want to hit on before we get out of here?
I mean, that should be like a whole thing.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to – I'm sorry to do this to you at the end because they've been awesome. I think that's the overarching thing. Like the defensive backs have been so good all across the board. They're rotating them a ton, and it seems like no matter who's playing where, they're all good.
Yeah, I think that's a fair analysis, especially that first group. They've just done a really nice job. And in first group, I'm going to put Quan in there because he gets some rotational stuff in there. But if there's one guy that I just want to highlight, it's Cam Curl. Because I think he seems to be kind of getting his hands on the football a little bit more, and I think that's
another pick today
that he has not done as well. Like he's a good football player. Like, I got Cam Curl pajamas, he's on my wall, like the poster of him or whatever. But he's never been like a turnover guy. Yeah. And so I think if he's going to get national recognition, if he's going to get paid, for him to come out and kind of show already that he's seeing the ball, he's taking a little bit more risks, he's being a little bit more dynamic. They're getting him out of that box roll a little bit into that post roll, seemingly, and again, he does everything. So it's hard to know if that's just on the day or if that's something that's longitudinal going to be going on. But he's a guy that I think deserves a ton of credit. Like he's made, I think that's his third interception at training camp. So he had 1 in 7-on-7 against a couple days ago. Maybe his second. Maybe I'm counting the fourth.
I think it's his second, but
right. But yeah, he's just doing a really nice job. So kudos to him and the whole group in general. But I think Cam deserves a little bit of a shout out.
I'll shout out BSJ. He's played inside, he's played outside, and he's been great. Hasn't really given up anything. He's consistently gotten his hands on, not necessarily picks, but like he's knocked down a couple balls. Like he's had a really good camp.
And kind of varied coverages and understanding his length, and you can see a maturity there. Yeah, definitely BSJ deserves a shout out for sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how they use him because Kendall's been good, Forbes been good, and he was so good last year. But here we are. We'll see what they do. And sometimes, unfortunately, knock on wood, I can't believe I'm even saying this out loud because now people are going to get mad at me if it happens. But sometimes these things sort themselves out because injuries happen, whatever happened. I mean, look,
True.
I've been around this team long enough that there's been like this question at corner before, and this guy gets hurt, and now it's like, oh well, now we know how we're gonna line it up.
Right.
So it's good to see. The positive is it's good to see that all these guys are super flexible and what they can do. They're all excelling at every position because it seems like they'll be ready for anything, barring something crazy happening.
Sure.
And that's what you want to see this time of year. And then hopefully they have tough decisions to make because everyone's healthy and available, and they just got to figure out how to line it up.
And if you're one of those guys who came in for DB only content, I guess we'll talk about them on Wednesday in more detail.
Yeah, for sure. I will say something too interesting. People should check out my interview with Kendall Fuller from after practice the other day. And something that Kendall talked about that just shows the intelligence of this group. I asked him, I was like, do you have to pay attention to who's next to you, right? Because you got all these pieces moving around. You pretty much stayed outside, but it seems like every other down, someone new is in the slot, someone new is playing safety. He's like, yeah, for sure, because they've all got different tendencies. They all play different ways. Sure. He mentioned Jeremy Reeves as like a guy that sees the game very similar to him, but they don't actually get a lot of reps together. So it was super interesting to listen to Kendall talk about that. And, you want to make things as simple as possible for your guys defensively, but because this group is made of such smart football players and they can all seemingly play off each other, it's going to be fun to watch them mix and match personnel, because if they can handle all the different, nuances of playing with each other, but quarterbacks and receivers going against them don't really understand how a coverage might be played a little different, like that's a huge advantage just based off personnel when we get into the season. All right, that is the show for today. Our last show without pads. Next time, Logan and I will be wearing shoulder pads on the podcast. No, practice starts on Tuesday with pads, so we'll have definitely a review of kind of how the O-line, D-line dynamic shifts. We can definitely talk about the DBs more at length later this week. Other than that, I don't know exactly who I'm talking to, but the PR staff has told me I'll have a nice sit-down interview with someone tomorrow at camp, so make sure that you are not just subscribed here to Take Command, but to the Hoffman Show podcast feed for that, or just, check us out live on the radio 4 to 7 each and every day on the Team 980. And Logan and I will be back with more content tomorrow and then full episode on Wednesday. That's it, and that's all for this edition of Take Command. And we'll see you then and there, wherever it is that you choose to pick up our voices from all the zillion places I just said. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.